Hello and welcome to the final section of my top 50 albums of the 2010s. 10 albums remain. We are going to talk about them probably in some depth. First, we are going to write A Major Injustice. With Sufjan Stevens' The Age of Odds. Why in the heck did this not show up on any of the other lists I was reading? We made so many videos going through so many best of decade albums lists, and I don't think I saw a single one that put this masterpiece of the album. What is up with y'all? What's the matter? Are you actually afraid of a little electronics? Because, yeah, sure, this is a pretty major departure for Sufjan at this point in his career. He'd actually started off making some electronic music with, like, Enjoy Your Rabbit. But after the much more, like, folksy music of the State albums and such, no one was really ready for this. And even if they knew he was going to do something really weird and unprecedented, no one's imagination could have captured this entirely new world of instrumentation that he builds here. There's just a mind-blowing diversity to these compositions. All of them beautiful, though. It feels like with each song, he challenges himself, either conceptually or structurally or instrumentally, to do something totally radical, super ambitious, extremely difficult. And if not just to prove that no challenge is unconquerable, that he can actually pull this all off in such a beautiful way. There's this eagerness to everything, an ecstatic, eager sincerity in every single one of these compositional choices. Everything just squelches and surges with this beautiful, fresh feeling, all the way from its deepest depths of meaning and significance, the stories that it's telling. Everything is so vibrant and new with these huge electronic beats bringing everything up into the light. But despite this kind of ecstasy, this fervor of newness, of throwing all of these new ideas out into the world, it all seems in service of something much huger and much older, something old and kind of sacred and traditional. Perhaps it is God, because this has some of Sufjan's purest kind of gospel messaging. You know, on the song Get Real, Get Right, the hook proclaims, get real, get right with the Lord. It's undoubtedly a very religious album, one that I think expresses kind of the hugeness of the mystery of God in Sufjan's mind. I wouldn't say it's like overtly religious in its moralizing or messaging, but more in just the fact that, you know, is there actually something this huge, this ancient, this transcendent that's kind of lurking above all of us? And if so, what more can we do than kind of express ourselves in this ecstasy around it? In many ways, I feel like this album is kind of an inverse of Bon Iver's 22 A Million that we talked about hours and hours ago, where there it was dealing with the crisis of atheism. Here it's like this celebratory revelry of faith. At the most dizzyingly complex and climactic moments where so many ideas and sounds and styles are colliding, there's this transcendent clarity that seems to emerge, that in the end, it feels like there is one true message that we can take from this. And even if we're not really sure what it is, or we can perceive only facets of it, we can feel its existence so huge atop this intricate structure of the music. It really has all of the aesthetics and motivation and power of some all-consuming manic project by some self-proclaimed minor prophet. And here I want to be clear that this is a compliment. The album cover, the artist's name eludes me, sorry, you can look it up, but it was an artist who made all of this kind of like apocalyptic prophetic art that was just super loaded with detail and personal significance and meaning. Someone who is devoted to this kind of all-consuming project. And I think Sufjan pays tribute to him because he recognized that on The Age of Odds he was doing something quite similar, that he was allowing every aspect of his life and every aspect of his music, every kind of direction that his talent could go, to all operate in service of this one gigantic, mysterious, all-consuming idea. Is it the mystery of God, the mystery of love? I don't really know. But I will say, though, that even though this album is so experimental and crazy, even though it has such uh, mind-blowing song suites and stuff, some of the most clearest messaging, some of the most resonant imagery to me is his writing on love, and some of the softer, more acoustic sections. And the first track I'll recommend is Futile Devices, the opening track, which is completely different than pretty much the rest of the album. But I find that this song's lyrics, you know, I think being in love is like a really wonderful thing. Doesn't always work out, but I think the way it kind of enhances the resonant depth of your life, the way it can make things more meaningful for you, is something really, really beautiful about it, and something to be celebrated, no matter what the context of the love is. And I think the song Futile Devices captures that idea, and then also captures things that maybe quite specifically to me I found really resonant, really evocative of very precious memories I had. Um, so I don't know. I don't know if it'll resonate as deeply with you, but I have a sense that there is something universal about it. That even though it seems like he's telling a very personal story, it's a personal story that we all have in some capacity. Then I'll recommend the exact opposite, from the shortest first song to the longest last song. On album 11, I recommended a 20-minute three-song suite. Well, this is even longer, goes through even more modes. The absolute jaw-dropping masterpiece, Impossible Soul, another song where even if this was the only song on the album, it might have made the list. I cannot overstate how impressed I am, how blown away I am by this song. Stuff like the auto-tune passage and the great celebratory dance at the end, and all of the wonderful call and response blending kind of gospel structuring with this most cutting edge of electronica work. And then all ending, well, I guess this is spoilers. I won't tell you how it ends, but it's deeply beautiful to me, a real echo of that deep love. Okay, beautiful album. Should have been on everyone's list, but what can you do? And next we have Now Only by Mount Eerie. This is another album that I thought was on way, way, way too few lists. But what's the matter with y'all? You had enough death? You haven't enough death already? You don't want even more death? So yes, this is the follow-up to A Crow Looked at Me, an album he made the year before, which was his heartbreaking, staggeringly difficult to hear initial meditations on the untimely death of his wife and the mother of his young daughter. A very special, precious album. And here in the follow-up, what I would say is that we're hearing this overwhelming incomprehensibility of real death that he was confronted with at this time, breaking down and crumbling into the dust that permeates the inevitability of just returning to your real life. That he goes on living without his wife, and that this is what that looks like. It's quite inspired by Sun and Moon and Nosgard. I heard him talking about this in an interview. Two artists that I was quite into right around when this came out. I still am, obviously. Sun Kil Moon is on this list, and I went on reading Nosgard. But very diary-like, starting with specific incidents in his day-to-day life and how those trigger long journeys through his memory, weaving together connections and patterns. There's this terrible, heartbreaking sadness, oops, I'm still up here, that permeates all aspects of his life, that every story he tells about things he's been doing in the aftermath of his wife's death are just burdened with this heavy sadness. But that sadness in turn casts this dark light on things that would otherwise go unnoticed, things that he recognizes and appreciates now, and such that you start to see that in some ways there's a richness that has grown from this. Things that have significance to him now that he may have overlooked before, things that resonate with him deeply that he at first may not have understood. It's an achingly beautiful performance. There's this deep meditative guitar which is blended with this permeating, rumbling, soft, warm noise, what I would call a sad noise that I think has really defined what I love most about his music all the way back since the earliest Microphones records. I think it's uniquely his to be able to, just through a bit of like feedback, a bit of rumbling, convey such a deep, rich, warm sadness. And his singing over top of this guitar and noise is so fragile. It feels like he's just always on the edge of crying. And yet there's such a depth to it. It feels substantially built by all of these memories, all of these experiences, all of his years as a musician performing in different eras of his life, that it feels like even if it broke, it would stand. Even if it dies, well, dies isn't quite the right word, but you kind of know what I mean. And yet there's this yearning outward to it as well, that it's not consumed by its past, but that it steps forward from that place into, for better or worse, the life that he must continue to live without his wife. In some moments, you sense that he really is recovering, that in, there's no real word to use it. It's not getting over it. It's not forgetting. It's not moving on. But that it's better for him one day than it is the previous day. That it hurts maybe a little less. But you also really appreciate the hugeness of the challenge that recovery entails. That at any second, some memory can come back to him, some association, some thing his daughter says, and he misses her afresh, and the grieving begins all anew. And throughout the album, you feel those cycles. You feel those moments of frustration almost, with relapsing into just the absolute depths of his sorrow, and yet also the deep sense of appreciation he has for this emotional magnitude, how significant it is to him. Ultimately, I feel that this makes death both underestimated, insofar as you won't realize how deeply it'll affect you until it actually happens, but also better understood, that it's not supernatural, it's not something totally transcendent and outside of how you normally behave and how your life is normally structured, but it's something that you can understand, something that you can put into the context of everything else that you have to do. Ultimately, it becomes somehow peaceful, that you accept death into your life as not as a known, as not the other, but as part of your life. And this is something that really resonates with me. I've found that in the aftermath of loss, where I've had friends die, or family members, or there's some great loss, that what ends up happening isn't that I get over it. It isn't that something changes and I'm like okay with it now. It isn't that I forget about it, but just that the initial grieving, the initial loss, which at first was so overwhelming, so terrible, so hopeless that it feels like you can't go forward carrying that level of loss, eventually it quiets down. Eventually it seems to settle into a feeling just like breathing. I've been trying, I keep trying to write a short story with that title, A Feeling Just Like Breathing, which would be about someone who has just lost a friend and how they how they describe the kind of the recovery. Um, yeah, it's all reflective of a time that a very close friend of mine died. An internet friend of mine that I used to talk to every single day. Um, that I thought, like, I'm never going to recover from this. And it's not like any of those feelings have gone away. It's just now that they're there with everything else. Yeah, this is yeah. My recommended tracks are Distortion. It's a long song where he goes over kind of his history with death and speaks quite honestly and earnestly about things that he believed as a child, and that you feel probably motivated a lot of how he grew as an artist and how he prioritized things in his life, and just really beautiful songwriting around these kind of diary-like introspections. It just kind of travels onwards and throughout. And now only the title track. I made another video about this song that is very, very long, that you can find on the channel. It's more of a traditional song. It has kind of a catchy melody and some choruses and such. But it has really profound moments in it, I think, where he talks about this is how my life is now, and I think this is what I'm trying to get at with this feeling just like breathing, that it essentially at a certain point you realize, like, okay, like this is it, and I can just keep going. Okay, next. Damn, this is tough. Next one is Jesus. This is a lot more fun to talk about. Yeah, this album is just crazy. It's not about death. It's about Kanye West. So, after the meticulously constructed masterpiece or bust, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, one of the most try-hard pieces of media in any medium I can think of, Kanye hits us with this on the follow-up. Look at it, doesn't even have an album cover. Like, can you remember? I mean, it sounds almost quaint now to look at Jesus and be like, what was he thinking, given that Kanye has done orders of magnitude crazier things in the 7 years since this. It feels almost charming now that we were all so shocked back then when the Kanye of now you can't even like look directly at. It's like the sun. It's noisy and aggressive and explosive and intense, but then also really hilariously irreverent, and yet at its core hauntingly real. And the juxtaposition between all of these different attacks um, comes with moments of such breakout serenity, jaw-droppingly gorgeous transitions into samples and reappropriations of songs that it's like, how does he even conceive of these things? Like, how does he think that, you know, having those two sounds back to back will sound good? Only Kanye. It's beyond cinematic. You know, I often talk about the cinematic nature of Kanye albums, that they seem to operate based on your engrossment, that they try to engage you by kind of having this sequence-based shifting, not like kind of scene by scene like other songwriting. It's hard for me to pin down. That's why I just keep calling it cinematic. But this is beyond cinematic. This is a world of experimental kinographs that blast across all of the senses simultaneously. Even though it's just music, it's so evocative and crazy that you feel yourself smelling the croissants and the Grey Poupon and the red cups strewn about the lawn. It really is. It feels like watching some crazy experimental film. Every minute of every track has something crazy going on, something just wildly inconceivable. And not just in the space of like mainstream pop hip hop that you might think Kanye is operating from, but as someone who listens to a lot of weirdo music, I still found myself shocked that there was things on this album that I thought were like kind of miraculously synchronized with my tastes at the time. That I was listening to a lot of like experimental electronica where they really kind of chop up the vocals and hit you with this like really kind of aggressive like screaming stuff. And Kanye was doing the same thing, and not just kind of in a lame trying to ride the wave attempt, but like with kind of mastery and confidence. He was hitting me with brand new appeals of things that I already had such a kind of weird musical fetishy interest in. Everything about this, though, for as weird and aggressive it became so iconic back in that summer of 2013. I felt like major life decisions, no, major life decisions is an exaggeration, but at least how we partied on the weekend was defined by the lyrics of this album. Was this because of the genius of the writing? Was it because everything that he writ was destined by its very nature to become so mimetic, to become so virally spread? Or was it because it was Kanye that people were eager to latch on to this fresh batch of memes right out the oven, the fresh croissants, to go back to that yet again? Does it even matter? It exists as it exists, and the influence it had cannot be overstated. And this is the mimetic singularity, I think. And as I talked about it on T-Lop, it felt like after this, Kanye started writing into the memes, that he wrote with the awareness that people would be tweeting it and shouting it at concerts for years to come. But with this, it felt like it was on the precipice of that infolding. Now, I'm not suggesting that Kanye is so unaware that he didn't realize that the lyrics he wrote were becoming memes, but it felt like something changed after this one. The way that he felt his music kind of reflected outwards in society seemed to take a shift on Yeezus. And the famous quote is that he brought in the legendary engineer Rick Rubin, and the instructions he gave him were, I don't want any radio singles. I don't want any of this to be played on the radio. And Rick Rubin then worked with him to make it so aggressive, so noisy, so experimental, destroying everything friendly, accessible, or traditional about it. It felt like that was Kanye saying something, that there was some sort of statement about how he wanted to be perceived in that. And I don't know if I can explain it right now. It would probably take like another 20 minutes. But there's some sort of like self-reflection of the ego happening here. And like this is right at the point before we get that infinite hall of mirrors that seems to have fried Kanye's brain as of late. But that at this point was just the boldness of turning that other mirror inward. Does this make sense? I don't know. We're just gonna keep clicking and reading. I really can't talk about this album very well. It feels like my head is gonna come apart just trying to encapsulate everything that this album seems to represent in Kanye's career and in hip hop and in music in general and in pop culture in general, or to talk about how it sounds, to talk about the meaning of the lyrics. All of it seems impossible to hold in my head at once. But it's a good feeling. It feels like it's just beyond me. It just blasts everything about itself into me, and yet I'm left feeling like I'm scrambling to grasp onto even the smallest piece. It's engrossing. It's exciting. It's wonderful that it still feels like this after 7 years. So my recommended tracks, probably not a big surprise. These are two of the most praised tracks on there, two of Kanye's just absolute masterpieces in general. New Slaves and Blood on the Leaves, both of them mixing major kind of rage at racial injustice, the outcry of the trodden upon, with some really like kind of more personal or archetypal self-awareness, kind of diving into these strange seeming hypocrisies while also evoking some like extremely deep collective trauma. It's really difficult to talk about how these songs operate, and matching with this kind of incapturable fractal nature, that the sound of these, the huge transitions between them, the number of beats that swirl inward and outwards, it's mind blowing. It's just simply mind blowing. Some really fantastic music. Okay. Next, we have Solange, a seat at the table. And here I'll reveal that I lied again. There is an even more secret boss, someone a level higher than both Frank Ocean and Sampha, and that is the voice of Solange. The power and beauty of her voice is simply indescribable. It's confounding. It doesn't make sense that it sounds so good. All of the attributes you can point to are insufficient. They don't add up to the overall product. It has some magical, miraculous secret sauce that just oozes from it. The production and the guest cast swirl around her, and in doing so, I think draw out a lot of the more subtle and beautiful qualities of her voice. That it's not just all on her to project everything that's wonderful about her sound, but that other things in contrast or in highlighting can help you appreciate it. And all of this crystallizes. I love the word crystallize, don't I? I think I've said crystallize like 12 times in these videos, but they become these moments of such glittering, radiant beauty that it seems impossible. It seems like it shouldn't exist. And I've talked about this feeling before, the feeling of listening to a song, kind of remembering how it sounds, but that aspects of it, you're like, no, 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 that can't be right. It can't sound that good. Like, it can't have all of the elements that I seem to recall about it. And I think I've never felt that more clear, excuse me, than in some of these miraculous moments of this album. And it's like, you know, yeah, they linger with you, but they're not so much like stuck in your head as it is like you're like aspiring to hear them again. You know, I'll give you like a definitive example. Maybe this will help. On Cranes in the Sky, there's this like really warm sound on the beat, and I feel like I can kind of hear it in my head right now. But it's like when I can get close to conceiving of how that sounds, I can't really remember like what else is happening with like the beat and stuff. And there's like some strings, I think. But when I kind of refocus and try to restructure those, I find that I can't hold that kind of warm hum in my head anymore. And then the whole thing just starts to kind of feel like impossible to me. So it's kind of there in my head, and it's going to linger and remain there in my head because I love it so much. But I can't quite capture it. I can't quite conceive that it's like really real, such that when I listen to it again, it kind of feels like a miracle. It kind of feels like a dream is coming true or something. That's something that you started to doubt the very possibility of is just playing. You're just hearing it. It's so good. And of course, all of this awesome musical gift is in service to a heartfelt, touching message. This is the fractal story of Blackness in America. It's told through many different voices, living through many eras. And these are stories that don't shy away from the pain they've felt, but they also dream of some transcendent possibility of these stories taking on a new context in some future. And I feel that this is something that will only grow more meaningful in some wonderful time in which stories of segregation, of racism by record labels, of having to do everything yourself, that those, even if the context in which those are true fades away, even if those wounds are healed and atonements made, that this will only grow more meaningful, that it previews the sound of that wonderful future. And here, though, I'm dipping my toe into a conversation that is much, much longer than this one, larger than this one slide, and not really the conversation that I should be trying to have. But it's something that I think is important, very important to try to understand these issues, to try to do your part in supporting justice, in making good, in if that's even possible for the massive racial suffering in America. But I feel hope, I guess, when I hear this album. I feel like this is the sound of better days. Something like that. I don't know. It's hard to talk about. My favorite songs that I would recommend are Cranes in the Sky, which I talked about before, that just has these radiant moments of beauty that it's like cranes in the sky. It really is. It's a song that feels like the beauty of seeing cranes fly overhead. And right now you're probably thinking like, what? Can't sound like that. Nothing sounds like that. But listen to it. You'll feel that impossible feeling come true. And then Fubu, For Us by Us, which actually kind of pays homage to the horns on Kanye's Blood on the Leaves. So back to back, I've kind of recommended a link of songs here. This is just a really wonderful song with a really powerful, inspirational message, and has some just joyfully beautiful guest features too. When The Dream especially comes in and sings, there's such a growing warmth in his voice that it feels like everything is permeated and flooded by that beauty, that sound. Okay, moving on to number 6, we have something completely different. 1 Minute Older. This is a compilation by various artists that are all affiliated with Virgin Babylon, my favorite record label that I mentioned quite a ways ago when we were talking about the New York Tribute album. So for the 15th anniversary of Virgin Babylon, they solicited 1 to 2 minute tracks by artists on their label and others that are kind of affiliated. This is an absolute buffet of the cutting edge of weirdo Japanese music. This used to say smorgasbord, and then I saw that I had used the word smorgasbord earlier, and I was like, can't use that twice. That's a once in a lifetime word. So now it says buffet. But yeah, all these really weirdo Japanese artists that are making very niche music coming together to provide a little sample of what they do. The genres range from thrash metal to solo piano to ambient to dozens and dozens of other genres that simply have no name. Each of these is perfectly bite-sized, so like at a buffet, you can experiment, see if you like it, and if you don't, no big risk, no big commitment. And yet each of them is substantial enough that it's memorable, that you can form some sort of attachment to it. This format excels in allowing extremes to emerge in a sustainable fashion. So if you want to go like all in on some direction, if you want to make your thrash metal song just the pure essence of thrash, or if you want your ambient song to not be fettered by any expectations of development or change, if you want to just play the piano for a bit, you can. You don't have to compromise at all, because no one would expect anything more than just in a few minutes. On the other hand, some stun you. They cram in several arcs and developments and leave you in awe that such a complete musical story could be expressed within a single minute. And I find what's really cool about this album too, because it's like a compilation of various artists and various genres and all sorts of different moods, but the way they're organized, all 50 of them across this album, is really enthralling. In the way that you can find like arcs of the same genre kind of like building and subsiding, or contrasts shifting between harsh thrash metal to somber kind of crystalline piano. It's really, really neat. Or like kind of comparing, okay, this is like an ambient track near the beginning of the album, this is an ambient track near the end of the album. How do they differ? What has kind of changed over the course of the entire album? I just find really any kind of like subset of tracks you look at, any patterns you find, it's not so much that it's going to be meaningful, but it's very entertaining to kind of draw your own connections and theories. I explained it more. Runs of escalating genre mode, jarring juxtapositions, and echoing themes many tracks apart. Yeah. I put it quite well there. I should have just trusted myself and clicked instead of trying to come up with something to say. And what I find really enthralling about this too is the endless fractal depth of the world of music that's revealed by listening to this. To know that every one of these artists has other music, has other people they collaborate with, has an entire scene that they kind of represent. It just spreads out endlessly. And after 5 years of listening to this with some frequency, I feel like there's still doors that lurk unopened to vistas that are totally unimaginable. Artists that I haven't really followed up on, movements and styles that I haven't looked for other representations of. That what I'm seeing is just glimpses through windows as I walk minute by minute past them, and that the vast majority of them I still haven't fully explored. It's actually kind of a melancholy feeling, to be honest. That I feel like it will never be completely explored. That I'll never fully understand. Even if I had such a beautiful utopian life that I could spend all of my time just following up with obscure Japanese artists on SoundCloud and Twitter and stuff, and being like, "What else you got? What else you into? What kind of music is this, anyways?" Even if I just did that as like a full-time job, I don't think I would ever completely plumb the depths of 1 minute older. For recommended tracks, I'll give you 4 because they're all very short. Virgin Steps by Dee Mouse. I love Dee Mouse and Virgin's. I guess it's Day Mouse actually. Anyways, Day Mouse, Dee Mouse. This is a really cool piano composition that just kind of doubles down on complexity. I love a sense of like blooming complexity in my music where it's not so much that it gets like faster or louder or like remixed, but just that everything kind of splits off fractally. The Etude for 12 Fingers by Matroshka, another one of my favorite Virgin Babylon associated artists. I think this piece is just really haunting and beautiful, and here the shortness of the tracks makes you just kind of long for more, that it's over just as you start to inhabit it. The Noisy 1 Minute Clock by Masahiro Kawano. I really, really love. I think it's so cute, so adorable. It's just the ticking of a clock, and every few seconds another kind of sound effect plays. But it's so enchanting, and it's a perfect example of the kind of musical experiment that could only really work in this format. And then Acer, I don't know, by Kawashiwa Daisuke, who does a lot of this kind of solo piano performance. This is just a beautiful little piece that I think shows you, the strength and not having to compose past a minute. Yeah. Okay. Next, we're into the top 5 now. And what better way to mark this kind of final frontier than Joanna Newsom's Divers. Yes, hooray, hooray, at last, it's finally Joanna Newsom time. We're talking about 45 albums of sub-Newsom trash. No, just kidding. I love all these albums, of course, but Divers and Joanna Newsom as an artist, I love more than almost anything. I'll acknowledge it. I'm a huge fan. I'm biased, and I'll champion it too. I think it's fine to be totally enamored with particular artists. To wait a minute. I was saying the exact opposite. A little while ago, I was like, I'm so happy that I'm not just like a blind fan anymore. That I don't just endlessly worship. I think at the time I made a joke about Joanna Newsom too, but it's kind of, it is very exciting to have an artist whom you respect so much, whom everything they put out you love, such that when something new is announced, when you begin to anticipate it, there's not a single molecule within you that doubts that you're going to love it. That even if it is just straight up garbage, knock on wood, Joanna Newsom will never release garbage, but I'm sure even if the disc was like a banana peel stapled to an AOL free trial disc, I would somehow listen to it and somehow be able to perceive a great beauty within it. And like, why not? Like, it's kind of like a superpower, you know, that you're able to bring music to this level of significance to yourself. But it is though. Like, come on. I mean, I'm acknowledging that I'm a huge fan and that there's maybe some bias here that I just devotedly love her works. But it's really, really good. Like, it really is. It's breathtakingly gorgeous music, intricately composed. It moves in these wonderful, engrossing dramatic arcs. It's in this magical place where it both engages you and yet it soothes you as well. But I mean, this goes without saying. I already said all of that when I said it was a Joanna Newsom album. um, the meaning of this album is very complex. It's a deep, deep meditation on subjects as diverse as natalism, love, time, the Levinian other, you know, Emmanuel Levinas, James Joyce, war, dedication, passion, history, of course, colonial relations as a particular area of historic importance and continued relevance to the current day. But then also, you know, the behavior of birds and what they may represent in human virtues and such, and a million other things as well. All of this is expressed through kind of natural metaphor, as I talked about, like the nature of birds or particular species of flower or whatever. Literary allusion, of course, Joyce, a major influence on this album, both as kind of his themes to be discussed and then also evoking Joyce's words in order to convey other grand ideas. And then, of course, the ultimate Joyce mode of expression, the hybrid personal, communal, and archetypal story, where you're telling something that seems to be the personal story of one character, but can also represent entire communities through history or archetypes of people. How many albums have I praised for doing this? I just love that kind of thing. I just think it's so, I don't know, I think that's just like the height of literature. And all of this stuff is here to the extent that you want to explore it. If you want to pour through the lyrics and look up references and start picking away at these little themes and recurring messages. But it's also just a really nice listen. You can just really sit back and enjoy it and be swept away into her enchanting worlds. So my take on the thesis of this album, which he's really trying to say with all of this, we are adrift in a cyclic sea of time, and only in moments of the deepest love and understanding can we appreciate that. Can we even notice the way things are changing? But before I go on for another half hour trying to justify this thesis, you might get something totally different. It's a very expansive album, and I think the most important thing is just to make meaning of it yourself on your own. My recommended tracks are actually the first two, so you can listen to these without fear of spoilers, and hopefully they'll be enough to entice you to listen to the whole thing. Anecdotes, the opening track has just jaw-droppingly, totally paralyzingly beautiful moments within it. There's this kind of churning sound that starts to build up in the latter half. The rushing, tearing, speeding home, bound to a wheel that is not my own. It just starts like flowing, and the twinkling piano over top of it. It's so beautiful. And then after that, Sapokanakan, this fractal dive through history, kind of looking at the same places as different colonizing forces reappropriates their meanings, statues placed over top of statues, paintings painted over paintings, and just these stories of kind of greatness that rise and phase like Ozymandias. So stirring, so beautiful, and throughout it, the music kind of reflects this shift. Just masterpiece stuff. Okay. How can there be 4 albums better than this? We're gonna find out. Next, we have this mysterious glyph floating in black. This, of course, is the burial symbol. And you might not recognize this album cover, even if you're a Burial fan. With very little fanfare, he announced and then released a compilation album called Tunes 2011 to 2019. And the relief I felt when I saw this album, because I'd been working on this list already when this album was announced. And one of the biggest questions I had is, what the heck am I going to do about Burial music? It's so godly. It's some of my favorite stuff that has been released in the last decade. But it was all stretched out across a ton of little EPs that just had 2 or 3 songs each. And I'm like, I gotta like choose, I guess, one of these. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. Like, I felt like I really wanted to honor how good this music was, and yet I didn't feel like, you know, any given one of his EPs was stronger than any of the other 50 albums I'd been considering. So what am I gonna do? And then this came out. Whew, now I can cheat. Now I can just put this album, which has all of the other EPs collected. Done. Easy. Done. Easy game. Easy life. Done. So, what kind of music has he been releasing in the last decade? Mostly it's been these huge, sweet tracks where each one is made of a ton of small segments, each kind of more transcendent and beautiful than the last, taking this on this long, flowing, upwards of 10-minute journey through the night. His music is like these skeletal 2-step beats that just drive the track forward, that are surrounded by cryptic samples, unnervingly catchy rhythms, haunting distortions, deep swirling darkness. The very essence of the night itself seems to be brought forth in these tracks. The cliche that everyone talks about with Burial is totally unavoidable. And it's true. This is the perfect walking around alone at night music. That if you want to do #nightwalk, head down to some sleepy suburbs, take in the beauty, loneliness, profound sadness of the night, this is the perfect soundtrack for it. But the music, though, even though you might associate it with these kind of dark times, is never actually distressing or abrasive itself. It's always very welcoming and serene and beautiful. And the message, I think, is one of hope and solidarity. That when we're in these places of isolation, when we feel most vulnerable and yet most empty, as if we're guarded and yet we have nothing to guard, when we in the world are most alien to one another, and it feels like we'll never be able to connect, we'll never be able to reach some sort of fulfillment. In those places, in those times, there is something important. There is something important that you can only reach by going there. And it's something really beautiful too. That's just for us. That's just for people at that place. People who might not have very much else. They have this. And it's something that we could never ever see otherwise. And it's the hidden places of the city at night. I remember, you know, once I was walking around the city, listening to Burial at night, and I found, this is in Toronto, I found this just tiny little like park area lit by a street post, and it had this kind of interesting curved bench thing. And I thought, you know, this is kind of neat. And it's not like you could only see it by yourself at night. In fact, it had been set up, I'm sure, as kind of like a social thing, that you can sit around this bench as like a group. But somehow seeing that by myself at night, listening to Burial, I felt like I had arrived at a very special understanding of it, at a unique appreciation of it, that under normal circumstances I wouldn't have been able to grasp. And I can't really put it into words now because, you know, that's kind of the point. You have to be there in these tender places and experience this kind of loneliness and emptiness, and then to realize that there's actually such a deep and profound beauty that you alone have seen. Don't get mugged though. I'm not Please be safe. Please don't get mugged. Here's my question though with this compilation. What's with the track ordering? I'm trying to figure it out. I'm seeing chronological order sometimes, reverse chronological order sometimes. Sometimes there'll be the two tracks from an EP but swapped. They'll still be like next to each other, but in the opposite order. Sometimes there'll be a new song, well, not a new song, but like a different song inserted into an EP between tracks that used to be released together. It's very mysterious. It really makes me wonder, like, what was the logic here? I'm excited to explore this compilation as a compilation more, not just as an excuse to have all of these tracks together on my list, but as like an actual album project in and of itself, and figure out, is there some logic to this? Why did he choose to put the tracks back to back the way he did? Anyways, it's difficult to come up with recommended tracks. It's because, as I said, all of these contain multitudes. It's more about particular moments and particular songs that really stand out to me. But I thought these two were a pretty good representation. Ashtray Wasp, the final track on the Kindred EP, I think is really, really beautiful. There's a piano section near the end that it gives me chills every time I hear it. And it also has kind of some of his more dynamic driving music. There's this part with these kind of cascading arpeggios that he was really into at the time. They show up on Loner as well. So it gives you a nice sampling, a nice range of stuff he's up to. Truant is kind of similar, another major sweet song, the opening track of the Truant Rough Sleeper EP, but again, here, mysteriously, it shows up after Rough Sleeper. There's some really, really cool sounds on this one. Some melodies that you'll find keep kind of like coming up. And it's kind of neat that like you can hear it in the context of the song, and the melody and the rhythm and the harmony and stuff feel really sad and full of this kind of loss and isolation. But then they get cut in your head and you'll find yourself like cheerfully whistling. I think that's how it goes. Something like that. And suddenly it takes on this totally bright and new context where it's like, hey, yeah, that's a banger. What a genius. I can't wait to see what he does in this next decade. Okay, 3 albums remaining. Y'all knew this one was coming. This one has to be on every list. Kanye West's My Dark... Wait! I can't actually think of what it's called. Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. There we go. Couldn't think of the ordering for a second. I was about to be my twisted fantasy? No, my twisted beautiful dark fantasy? My dark twisted whatever. Anyways, I chose the real album cover. I didn't wimp out. Try to take me down, YouTube. My beautiful dark twisted fantasy. Yes, that's the right ordering. So, I think the most important line on this album in terms of understanding this album is I know damn well y'all feeling this shit, which he proclaims on Power. This, I think, is the most confident album of all time. Everything is operating on the assumption that everything up to that point has been like your favorite album of all time. Not just that you're enjoying it, but that you're so into it and you're like frothing at the mouth to hear more. It just compounds upon itself to the point to like an infinite ramp up, that everything before it assumes you loved everything you've heard, and then they build on that confidence, on that assumption. There's tons and tons of examples, hundreds of them across these tracks. But some good representations of what I'm trying to talk about are like Raekwon's verse on Gorgeous, which was like a really good song, but a very kind of standard, verse, hook sort of song. And then at the end, the beat switches up to like a remix of itself, and Raekwon comes in. And it's like the song had been out for years, and then this like hype remix comes out because it's like such a runaway mega hit. But no, the song is being released on this album alongside this like remix of itself, such that, you know, if you didn't like Gorgeous, if you weren't into Gorgeous, if you were kind of bored of it, when the remix starts, you're going to be like, ugh, more. Okay. Well, sorry, I keep calling it the remix, but, you know, Raekwon's verse, the finale of the song. You're going to be like, oh, all right, whatever, more of this. But there's a 0% chance of that. Just the confidence of it itself is enough that when it comes in, you're like, oh shit, Raekwon! The outro of Runaway, which is just absolutely crazy. Kanye goes into this complete self-reflective hall of mirrors. Hey, I used that image before. I don't know how to describe it, but it goes super auto-tuney, and he just like spirals off into oblivion. And I think if you didn't love the song up until that point, if you weren't singing along with the choruses and super pumped by the Pusha T verse and just had everything hitting super hard, this outro would just give you a headache. It might just like make you nauseous. But Kanye knows. Kanye doesn't have a cell of doubt in his body that you are feeling this shit and that you are going to be with him for every minute of this extended outro. Probably my favorite example is on Blame Game. Near the end, there's this part where all these different voices are swirling around him, and things are kind of being shouted and juxtaposed, and it's like these scattered fragments of memory. And one of them is you hear all of the lights, but it's like a distorted sample from all of the lights from a previous song on this album. The album samples itself because it's so confident that that previous song will become like iconic in your mind just later in the album, that when you hear the all of the lights, it has all of the significance of that song, right? Like this only operates if you know that song so well that hearing the title be dropped in isolation is enough to like evoke all of your feelings for it instantly. It's crazy. It's crazy. Who can write like this? It's just unreal. So the result is one of the most maximally dense, try-hard artistic projects of any medium. Because it's not so much that you can just be like, well, I'm confident, this is going to work. But to really operate based on that confidence necessitates that you're going to just keep building and building on top of yourself. That things are going to be so many layered, many faceted, that it ends up being this structure, this glorious piece of musical architecture, unlike really anything I've seen anywhere before. Just trying to enumerate. This is a good exercise if you want to kind of lose your mind. Pick any one song and try to enumerate like every decision that would have to be made in its production and in its composition. It's mind-boggling. It's sheer cinematic ecstasy. There's such a wonderful sense of anticipation and satisfaction. Like so many verses on this album, like from the very first note of the song, I get pumped to just hear that rapper come in, and it's I don't know how he does it. And this is where it gets crazy. The album itself is about the crisis inherent in the very pursuit of making art this great. You're at the crux of power because you have so much freedom and so much genius that you have the power in your hands to make something this good, this powerful, this important. But then you also kind of feel like this responsibility that you need to make something that good, which is not easy, no matter how much of a genius you are. And the feeling of being torn apart by the love of the freedom you have, which enables you to work this way, but then also this maddening desire which fuels the actual work itself, and yet puts pressure on that freedom to keep kind of giving you the creative juice. In the end, you're in a crisis. You have to ask yourself, like, what do you really want? Is it just to be loved? Is that what it's really all about in the end? It's a story of the sacrifice of creation, triumphant in its own telling. This sort of thing I love so much, that you hear them suffering and sacrificing in service of this great project. But the fact that you're hearing that is proving to yourself as you hear it that this project actually exists, that they won, that it happened, that it came to be. It's really inspirational too. Just kidding though. What this album really is about? It's Kanye West. There's an interview where he goes, "Is this album about Kim? No, this album is about me." Famous Kanye interview. Very good. And again, it's operating on the personal, communal, archetypal level. But here with Kanye, sometimes that almost feels like incidental. That for him, it's really all about the personal, and that in trying to tell his story, he feels like it's necessary to evoke greater issues, greater stories, and the larger cultural landscape in which he has to operate. But again, in service of telling his own story. And what emerges is Kanye as the protagonist of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Seeing him go through all of this, both as creator and protagonist, he develops into quite a compelling and even endearing character, I find. I kind of think of him as like a shonen protagonist in this, in that he takes on so many challenges, and yet in the end there's this confidence that he's always going to win because, of course, he's the hero. He has to win. That's how these stories always go. Yeah, I don't know. I think Kanye as Luffy is maybe an enticing line of thinking, for better or worse. So my recommended tracks for this, kind of difficult to choose. I think Power is just a fantastic, very poppy, very catchy, very powerful song that really encapsulates a lot of the messages. Kanye says it quite clearly. My creativity, purity, and honestly is honestly being surrounded by these grown thugs? Something? Reality is catching up to me. Fighting from something in my inner child. I'm fighting for custodies with these responsibilities that they've entrusted me as I look down at my diamond encrusted piece. It just says it all right there. And then Runaway, crazy song, like 9 minutes long, featuring that insane auto-tune outro that I was talking about. A really slow burn of build up and these like beautiful climactic moments. Something that, is so ambitious that I think you would be forgiven if you were an artist and you swung for something like this and totally missed. But the song has become so iconic that at Kanye concerts, when he just plays the first note, ding, and everyone freaks the frig out because they know Runaway is coming. It became like such a hit. It became such an iconic staple of Kanye as an artist, even though it's so weird and so ambitious. I really think everyone needs to experience it at least once. Okay. We're into the top two. Next, we have an album that probably people who have been following this list, and especially after my description of number 5, probably expected at number 1. Which is Joanna Newsom's Have One on Me. Her third album. I love this album cover. Feels like every time I look at it, I see things I hadn't seen before. Just beautiful. And this is undoubtedly the most ambitious album of her career. It's the whole story of a relationship that's expressed over 18 tracks, 3 discs, and 2 hours of Joanna Newsom music. There's the initial swooning, the depths of love, and then loss with another. Wait, why did I put with another? Huh? I have no idea why I put with another. The disintegration of the relationship, and then the eventual parting and leaving. It's expressed, of course, in her signature blend of poeticism, allusion, oblique reference, all the same kind of styles that we talked about when we were talking about Divers. But also, there's such a raw emotional performance, too, that even though her lyrics are kind of quite obscure, it's like watching, a fantastic actor deliver Shakespeare. That beyond, the meaning of the words, you can feel the significance to them, the emotional depths of their heart. It feels like she's both bearing the innermost parts of her emotions while also plumbing the deepest depths of her intellectual thought in order to express it in the most powerful way possible on both these fronts. It's a constellation of dazzlingly perfect moments lurking deep within the dramatic arcs of the composition, and that illustrates a world from your unique perspective. I think I've used quite a clever image here, one that I think I've used before when talking about this album, that constellations, only make sense from the unique perspective of the Earth. If you were somewhere else, all of the stars would be relatively somewhere else, and you wouldn't see the same constellations. It's pretty obvious. And similarly, I think when you're listening to this album, certain moments will stand out to you. Certain shifts or juxtapositions, transitions from one song to the next, particular lyrics, or kind of motifs across many lyrics, will illuminate for you much brighter than they would for someone else. And such that even though we're looking at like the same stars, the same songs, we see our own unique constellations, and the stories, of course, that people tell about constellations, the characters they represent, will be yours alone. Yeah, the density and hugeness of this album, the number of ideas it expresses, is enough that really no one can hold it all. No one can have that level of significance for each and every song and lyric. Not even me, and I'm obsessed with this album. You develop your own subset. You find what matters to you particularly. You build memories and associations as you continue to go back to this album. When you listen to it in meaningful times and link that memory with the lyrics and moments that stand out to you on that listen, building another dimension into this constellation of where it was that you first saw that star, I really cannot overstate the preciousness of this album. That over the last 10 years, I've listened to it as something that really brought me both comfort and stimulation, a place that I could escape to, and yet something that had bearing on the realest parts of my life. And because of that, because of this kind of library I've built up within it, it's become just unstatably precious to me. How meaningful all of it has become. Well, again, not all of it, but what I've gathered from it. But really, I'll admit it, you can say that about any album that's this literary, that holds this much reward when you kind of pursue within it for meaning. And this just happens to be mine. This is the one that holds that level of appreciation for me, that I've built up to that significance, that depth of resonance with me. And I really hope that such things exist for you too, that it doesn't have to have one on me. Although if you're looking for a contender, have one on me is pretty good. It's pretty good for this sort of thing. But that I'm sure you have other things, and maybe they're not even music, but that you've been returning to time and time again throughout the years, that always hold something new, but something familiar, that resonate with the things that are happening in your life at that time, and that become almost like a diary that you've kept, that when you return to it, it re-sparks all of those feelings and all of those memories. I think it's so precious and important to allow these sorts of things to build up in your life. And this one is one of mine. This one is an important one for me. All right, my recommended tracks. The title track, Have One on Me, really, I think is kind of a microcosm of this album. I think it goes through a lot of different modes. It shows off a lot of her talents, a lot of the really kind of dramatic shifts and surprises that she can throw at you. I think if you don't want to commit to the full 2 hours, this kind of gives you a sense of what it might be like. I know when I was first kind of having my first true appreciation for Joanna Newsom, the first time I really started getting into her music, it was because of this song. This was the song that I listened to actually on repeat for quite a while. until I realized, like, oh, I could just be listening to the whole album instead of 2 hours of this, and I'd probably like that even better, which I did. And then Soft as Chalk, which is a little more kind of traditional, a little more traditional in its structure, but still this really crazy, always shifting arc that I think brings out a lot of the themes of this album in terms of the story that this album is trying to tell. It has some really impressive vocal performances by Joanna Newsom. A lot of people are kind of put off by her voice, or they have a hard time kind of getting used to it. And I think Soft as Chalk is a great way to really find the appeal of it, and then from there kind of learn to appreciate the way she sings across lots of tracks. So to be clear, these aren't my two favorite songs on this album. I think these are just like the best way to kind of introduce yourself to the album if you don't want to commit to listening to all of it. But for me, you know, the real masterpiece track that's Kingfisher, or Go Long. Ooh, Go Long. Okay, anyways, okay. Oh, this album is so good. Oh, it's so good. But it's number 2. Can you believe that? It's number 2. So, what is number 1? Well, it's Les Ronettes by Matryoshka. Yes, even after all of that, I had to give it to this album that no one's ever heard of. And look, it wasn't just to be contrarian, okay? It wasn't just so I could say, well, you know, my number 1 album, I didn't even see it on anybody else's list at all. You know, it gives you a little pleasure to do that, but really, the appeal of this album to me makes it impossible for me to put it anywhere besides number 1. This album is extremely special and extremely transcendently good to me. How do I explain it? It's kind of simple. We have some really dramatic strings being played, and then kind of a beat over top of it, usually just a standard drum kit. There's this woman kind of whisper singing about something. Maybe it's English, maybe it's Japanese, maybe it's Russian. No, you can actually kind of tell what she's saying. It's mostly in English. There's some outdoorsy sounds, some crickets, the gentle blowing of a night breeze, a piano sound, which I find just exquisitely mastered, the very Platonic ideal of what I think a piano should sound like, and some really kind of glitchy stuff. That all of this is kind of chopped up and shifted and presented to you in kind of a glitched out way. So, you know, it's music like that. It's several tracks all kind of in this mode. Why is it so good? It just sounds so good to me. I don't know how I can explain it. It feels like my brain is being elevated to some beautiful state of both calmness and engagement. Maybe it's kind of ASMR-like, but it's really powerful to me, and it's not something that I encounter very often, even with other albums on this list, you know. And I said something similar about Joanna Newsom level, this music, this mixture of calmness and engagement. But this is just another level. Like it's unreal the way this album affects me when I listen to it. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of a trick they use pretty often in their music that a lot of Virgin Babylon artists actually use, where you have really precise rhythms, like someone playing on like a snare drum that punctuates long phrases of voice and violin. Especially when there's kind of like a glitchy element and that rhythmic part is sort of made impossible, or it has kind of like that IDM rush to it. Having that punctuate in between something that's a lot more calming, it I don't know, it just like ticks something in me. And a lot of my all-time favorite music across decades and across genres and stuff has moments like this too. I don't know. It's like some weird cheat code access to the deepest meaningful sensors of my brain. Yeah. I guess I did have a point about this. The glitchy elements subvert this kind of dynamic of smooth ta 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 ta, And there's this weird ambiguity of time where it feels like it's almost like, again, this kind of impossibleness that you can't conceptualize even as you're hearing it, how things are ordered, how things are sequenced on top of one another. It's really fascinating, really compelling. But ultimately, it's not like you're intellectually engaged on this level. Like, it was kind of difficult for me to analyze what was going on, why it affects me so much, to detach myself from it. Because when I listen to it, it's not like I'm thinking about these elements in any sort of isolation or any sort of intellectual capacity. I'm just gone. I'm just transported somewhere far away to some calm moonlight night on the edge of a forest. I don't know. So I feel like this is kind of the next level of the hopeful feeling I get from Burial. That again, it's night, it's alone, it's wistful and longing, and some place that I had to go to because I didn't have something else, because I was not invited in. I'm not trying to make myself sound like all victimized or sad or something, by the way. I don't know. I hope it doesn't come across like that. It's not like I'm saying, blue, 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 I have no friends. I have a lot of friends. I have a very fulfilling social life, but still, though, you do feel lonely at times, right? Everyone feels lonely at times. Everyone feels like they're disconnected from the world at times. And it's in those times that I think art is most important to us, because that's all we have. And with Burial and with this, I feel the preciousness of being able to feel that way, of the things you can see only from that place. And it's like everything that's happened until now, all of the suffering that's coming to mind, all of the trauma and tragedy that feels like it's doomed you in these moments, in these places of depression and isolation, that all of that was necessary to unlock your appreciation for this. This is something that in a lot of different mediums I feel strongly when I'm like at that precipice of what feels like maximal artistic enjoyment and appreciation, that it gives me the perspective to think, well, all of it has been worth it, all of it has been meaningful and important because it's allowed me to appreciate this. And of course you can't think about that with, like, I don't know, like something like Kanye West. Obviously I love Kanye West, but I've never felt like, it was worth going through that long depressive period so I could appreciate Kanye West, because that doesn't make any sense. Who can appreciate Kanye West? But something like this, the fact that this is so powerful to me, the fact that this can move me so deeply, makes me think that, all of the myriad experiences I've had until now, were serving kind of a greater purpose. And that's a really, really powerful feeling. It's a feeling that can really get you through some difficult things, because there are things in our life that we can't change. There's things that we are just kind of dealt to us and we're forced to deal with. And sometimes the unfairness of that can feel really, really, really heavy. So it's important to realize that something has come of it too, that something precious has come of that as well. Maybe you don't think so far as, well, I'm glad it happened. That's maybe too much. But you think, I have this at least. Yeah, so what I get from Burial is kind of like, this beauty is within your sadness. But with here, I feel like it's kind of like, this beauty is beyond your sadness. That this is what it sounds like because you've walked through that dark forest and now you've come out the other side and you can see the stars above you. That's what it feels like. My recommended tracks are Noctambulist, a very, very suitable title, of course, meaning someone who walks at night. This has a really nice dynamicism where the first half of the track is just kind of like weird and fractal, and it slowly kind of glitches together a sense of song and structure. And then afterwards, all of those same sort of motifs and melodies come back in full symphonic force, like kind of fully realized. Cut All Trees has like a similar sort of dynamic of like a first idea exploration, and then a second, those ideas kind of presented in their full beauty and complexity. The title, of course, feels a lot more, I don't know, distressed or something, and similarly, the music has this kind of urgency to it. I think it's a banger for sure. All right, that's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. We did it. That's it. Except for, of course, the inevitable meta commentary afterwards. If you didn't expect this, you obviously haven't been watching the channel very long. So, I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of myself. The most difficult of all of these 2010 lists is done. It's done! Hooray! Hooray! It's done! It's done! It's done! Also, I think this list was the most important to me. Even though this channel is much more focused on manga, and we will be doing a manga list, and we talk a lot about anime too, and the anime list is going to come after this one, the music one is actually the most important to me in terms of making a list. Lists actually, they really matter to me a lot. Probably too much. I don't know. I'm a little list crazy. Especially album lists. And I think the reason for this is pretty obviously to me, because when I was first really getting into music, when I first decided I am going to be a huge nerd and learn as much about music as I can, the Pitchfork end of decade lists, where they went back to like the 70s and the 80s, the 60s, and talked about the best albums of that decade, that was basically gospel. Not so much that I blindly wanted to align my taste with theirs, but because here was laid out like a canon for me of hundreds and hundreds of albums that at the very least were worth listening to, were worth considering, that had something pretty special going on. And just, I can remember even now, the feeling of kind of awe I had scrolling through those lists, looking up these bands on Wikipedia, trying to find them on like BT Junkie or whatever torrent site I used back in those pleb days before I got into Oink. I'm really showing my age right now, but whatever. Yeah, they were really important to me. They really opened my eyes in a lot of ways in my early teens. I really wanted to rise to the challenge of making something like that of my own. I really wanted to make something that maybe other people could look at with the same sort of awe. I don't know. It seems kind of bold now that I'm saying it out loud, but I wanted to rise to that challenge. I wanted to do my best. Talking about music is so hard, though. I feel like I really barely scratched the surface of why I like these albums, or let alone why I think they're like good. You know, like maybe it's easier to talk about, okay, well, I had this personal experience and this makes me feel this way. But to try to convey like why I think the quality of the music brings that out instead of just being an idiosyncratic thing for me, that's difficult. I really feel like I barely said anything. And we've talked about music for like 5 hours over these videos now. I had to limit myself though to just having one slide of information per album. And then when making the videos, trying to stick to the slide as much as possible, not jumping to at least a brand new point-worthy tangent. I just knew I had to do that or else it was never, ever, ever going to get done. There was big challenges in composing the list itself and picking out the albums for it. I made sure there was no rules for variety. I didn't want to limit myself to so many albums per artist or per genre or whatever. I just wanted to choose the ones I genuinely liked best. I tried to avoid a sense of like poptimism. This is kind of hard to explain, but I feel like there's some albums that I really, really enjoy and that I often like put on and accompany me through just kind of, I don't know, just whatever times. But then, you know, I could hear one of those albums like 100 times, but never really like think about it, never feel compelled to really like dive into it, never find that it's coming to mind in like resonant times or holding some deep emotional significance to me. I just enjoy it. And I decided I wanted to skew more towards albums that I felt kind of seriously about, that seemed to really impact me and matter in some kind of uniquely profound way. I also didn't have, I didn't want to favor albums that had like standout tracks. If an album had like 5 tracks that I absolutely loved, but then another 5 that I often skipped or thought were kind of meh, that I would leave that album off. That an album had to feel complete and enjoyable as listening to the whole thing. My feeling is that I would save those songs and put them on the best songs list. Am I gonna do a best songs list after seeing how much work this one is? I don't know. Hopefully. I also didn't want to include things just for historicness. I didn't want to include based on the feeling that I ought to include an album because it was so significant, so critically beloved, that it represented some moment or some turning point. I only wanted to reflect my own personal experience, my own listening experience, and not be swayed by what mattered to other people. That's difficult though, because of course, all of that stuff influences you too. But in making these rules and in avoiding these sorts of situations, have I overcompensated? Like, I would get into situations where it's like, okay, well, I can include this album or this album. This artist I already have on my list. This artist is brand new. And it's like, I really don't want it to be because this artist is brand new. So then do I subconsciously favor the one that's like a repeat artist because it doesn't feel like I'm bending to this like hypothetical diversity rule? You know what I'm saying? Like it's difficult. I was constantly agonized. Well, agonized seems a little extreme. I was vexed. I was challenged by trying to figure out like how do I authentically represent what I actually like. And I maybe you noticed this. I feel like I had a 2010 bias. There's a ton of albums on here from 2010. I think this is because I had already gone back and made a 2010 list, and I probably put more effort into that list because I did it when I was unemployed. I remember putting a ton of effort into that list, like listening to a lot of albums and really thinking about them a lot, such that I feel like my musical knowledge of the year 2010 is more than the rest of the years, and my appreciation of the albums of 2010. Probably also just because I've had the most time to listen to them, so they've become the most like important to me. But yeah, something like 4 2010 albums are in the top 10. Something like that? I don't know. It's crazy. I'm kind of scared. I haven't actually compiled this yet, but I'm both curious and scared that if I put a distribution of the lists, that it would probably show my wavering level of nerdiness about music very explicitly, which I think would be kind of frustrating. Like some years I just had the lifestyle or whatever to support listening to a ton of music, to like almost every day listen to a new album, to keep up on all the major releases. Other years, like when I was working at an office job, I couldn't listen to that much music. I really just wanted certain things. I didn't have kind of the energy to experiment with my tastes and explore. And that's kind of sad to me. It feels like there's so much that I left undiscovered. So many opportunities that just kind of silently passed me by without even realizing what I was missing out on. And I mean, that's how it is to be into a medium. You're never, ever going to feel like you've captured everything that's going on. Even being into like a particular genre or something, you'll never feel confident that you're hearing everything that you would like. It's tough, man. It's tough to care this much. The more you devote yourself to making lists like this, the more you realize how incomplete your list will forever be. That's the tragic lesson of this. The harder you work at it, the more you want to work at it. Okay, really though. What I realized is that I probably can just never really be happy with this. Probably no permutation of the around 300 albums that I had in consideration for this list would actually make me feel totally content. Any list I could generate, I would be like, I don't know. And you know, that's a lot of combinations. To have 300 albums and to choose an ordering of 50 gives you this many. And I feel like not one of those lists would make me significantly happier than the one I ended up going with. So that gives me some comfort. In the end, this is good enough. This is good enough. So I hope you find some music from here that you like. And look forward to the next list, which will be on the anime of the 2010s. And that's it. We got through all the slides. Okay. Bye-bye.